Well, thank you very much for the invitation. For the audience, they are going to hear some repetitions because obviously the two previous speakers have included some of this information, but I believe it doesn't hurt to repeat some of this data. So typically, give me a sec. Yeah. Typically, when talking about cutaneous leishmaniasis, we refer to cutaneous leishmaniasis in the New World and Old World. This classification is based, besides the geographical distribution, of course, in the species of Leishmania causing the disease, which are different in both parts of the world. Each of these parasites have a particular life cycle involving different vectors, reservoirs, and clinical manifestations. Some of these infections evolve to a more complicated clinical form, such as the Leishmania recidivans, which is usually associated to infections to Leishmania tropica, or mucocutaneous leishmaniasis, which is associated with Leishmania vianea parasites in the New World. It has been estimated that every year there are more or less between 0.7 to 1.2 million of new cases of cutaneous leishmaniasis only, which is equivalent to more or less one case every 30 seconds. By 2016, WHO reported that 87 countries were endemic for CL. And based on the number of cases reported in 2018 to WHO, it was found that 12 countries contribute to approximately 90% of all cases globally. It worth mentioning, however, that only around 70% of countries considered endemic for CL report routinely to WHO, and some of the countries who have very high numbers are not routinely reported to WHO, sadly. No prophylactic vaccines against CL are available, and the drugs we are currently using have serious limitations, making CL altogether one of the most neglected diseases among the NTDs included in the WHO list. As you can see in this graph, the number of CL cases reported to WHO during the last 20 years has increased by 5-fold, more or less, from 50,000 cases in 1998 to 250,000 in 2018. Even though these numbers are partially because more countries are now reporting to WHO, the major contributors to these numbers include the emergence of new CL foci, outbreaks which are reported constantly every year, the high number of cases reported in refugees, camps, and displaced populations. The Syria example is one of the best examples, the problem in Syria, and an increased number of CL cases reported among international travelers. This slide summarizes the current treatment recommendation for CL. Basically, treatment is recommended based on the clinical presentation of the disease and the species of Leishmania causing the infection. Treatment recommendation goes from only observation, as in the case of lesions, small lesions caused by Leishmania major or Leishmania mexicana, which are considered to be self-cure at least around 50% of the cases in around 12 weeks, followed by topical treatment for those patients with small lesions in size and number, usually no more than 4 lesions of no more than 4 centimeters in diameter. Systemic treatments are recommended for patients with large lesions in size and number, or lesions in face or anatomical areas where a topical treatment is not feasible. And finally, there are several combinations recommended, which are reserved for special cases of patients with the Leishmania recidivans, for example, or those patients who don't respond to monotherapy. Regarding topical treatments, the ones recommended by WHO includes liquid nitrogen or intralesional antimonials, either alone or in combination. These treatments are applied to 1 or 2 times per week for several weeks, sometimes up to 15 weeks. Thermotherapy, even though it's much simpler, requiring only 1 to 3 applications, is sadly not widely used for different reasons. The efficacy of any of these treatments is variable, and in most cases around 70% only. A cream based on paramomycin has been for many years mentioned in WHO treatment guidelines and in other treatment guidelines. However, such cream is not registered and not commercially available yet. So no patients are being treated with this cream. That's why I cross it out with this red line. Regarding systemic treatments, Fabiana has already mentioned the advantages and disadvantages of mainly disadvantages for the drugs we are currently using. We continue using drugs that were developed for visceral leishmaniasis and for other conditions. It's worth mentioning that no drugs have been specifically developed for cutaneous leishmaniasis. What we are using is because we have inherited from other diseases. Antimonials, either meglumine antimoniate or sodium stibogluconate, are the more widely used. Treatment consists of 20 days of intramuscular or intravenous injections. More of the patients, around 60%, develop electrocardiographic abnormalities or liver or renal enzymes. And its efficacy varies from 50 to 90%, depending on the species and the clinical manifestation. Miltefosine, as mentioned by Fabiana, is so far the only oral drug available. It needs to be taken for 28 days. Nearly 60% of patients experience nausea and vomiting. And as it was mentioned, the main problem is the teratogenicity, which makes, if you are treating women in childbearing age, they have to use contraception up to 3 months after the end of the treatment because the long effect of miltefosine. Pentamidine is recommended only for Leishmania guianensis infections, while the use of amphotericin B the experience is quite limited given the cost and is mainly used as a rescue treatment in some cases. So as you can see, there is a big gap here in terms of the need for a short, safe, and more field-adapted treatment for cutaneous leishmaniasis. And this applies not only for cutaneous leishmaniasis, but for visceral leishmaniasis, as previously mentioned by Fabiana as well. So in response to these needs, DNDi, in consultation with experts on CL, researchers, and other key stakeholders, developed a strategy aiming to cover all possible scenarios given the current treatment recommendations. The strategy aims, as similarly to BL, to develop a short, efficacious, safe, and easy-to-use treatment for all forms of cutaneous leishmaniasis. And as in the case of visceral leishmaniasis as well, we have split the strategy in the long term and the short term. In the long term, the DNDi is looking for opportunities to develop a topical treatment for those patients with uncomplicated CL, oral treatment for patients with large number of lesions or those who do not respond to local treatments, and an immunomodulator for cases where the lack of proper immune response by the host has been implicated in the severity, the chronicity, or the treatment outcome of the disease. We acknowledge, however, and that was mentioned by Maria Paola at the beginning, that developing of this treatment from screening to registration takes a long period of time. Therefore, in the short period of time, it is proposed to see if there is an opportunity to better use any of the current approved treatment options, but in combination. Following different approaches, but always avoiding duplication or efforts and prioritizing the collaboration with other groups, during the last years, DNDi has been able to advance in the ECL program. In relation to the improving existing tools, DNDi is testing the combination of a single application of thermotherapy, 50 Celsius degrees for 30 seconds, plus 3 weeks of miltefosine. We completed a phase 2 study showing the superiority of the combined approach when compared to thermotherapy alone. Now we are embarked in a phase 3 study in 4 countries in Latin America, aiming to demonstrate the non-inferiority of the combination of the thermotherapy plus miltefosine when compared to the standard monotherapy treatment, either antimonials or miltefosine. Results of this study are expected by mid-year next year, by Q2 2022. Regarding the development of topical treatments, we know that there are several groups working on this, on different formulations. So rather than duplicate efforts, it was decided to better enter in communication with these groups and see if there is any opportunity to support and collaborate with them. One of these groups, by the way, is the one leading by Professor Dolores Carrer, who will be the next speaker in this symposium. Concerning oral treatments, Fabiana has also already mentioned the different new chemical entities that are being developed by DNDi and other groups. What I'm going to mention here is that these NCEs have shown to be very active against Leishmania strains causing visceral leishmaniasis, but also cutaneous leishmaniasis. So our plans are that as soon as the phase 1 studies are completed, which are similar for both conditions, we plan to initiate phase 2 studies testing these compounds on CL patients. As regard to the immunomodulators, DNDi is developing a TLR9 agonist. It belongs to a class B CpG and is named D35. D35 is a synthetic DNA molecule developed in the FDA laboratories in collaboration with Osaka University. It stimulates mainly the plasmacytoid dendritic cells, producing IFN gamma through the activation of the natural killer cells, monocytes, and dendritic cells, and secreting IFN alpha and beta, but having no effect on B cells. CpG D35 is proposed to be used in combination with an antiparasitic drugs, either the existing ones or the ones that the DNDi is developing together with other partners. We are planning now, we were able to complete all the preclinical and the CMC studies of this D35 last year, and now we are organizing the phase first in human study, the single ascending dose study. We are hoping to initiate in Q2 2021. Now I'm just going to a few words regarding the recently launched 2030 WHO NTD goals. As you for sure know, CL is targeted for control only. The goal by 2030 is that 80% of all cases are detected and reported, and 95% of those cases treated. Using the numbers of new CL cases per year estimated by WHO in 2010, it means that by 2030, we will need to be treating between 0.6 to 1 million of new cases of cutaneous leishmaniasis every year. And based on what we know right now, the only way of achieving such an ambitious goal is by having in place several tools, mainly a safe, efficacious, and short and easy to use treatment for cutaneous leishmaniasis. There are, of course, other needs which I'm not going to discuss in details in this opportunity, but I believe it worth mentioning them, including the need of having a point-of-care diagnostics, which I understand tomorrow is there are going to be several talks on diagnostics, development of better system for identification and treatment of patients, and of course, better reporting systems. Several studies have shown that the number of cases reported by the national programs are much lower than the real numbers. So system for early identification, treating and reporting CL cases are needed need to be strengthened if the countries want to achieve the 2030 goals. Finally, a few words about the other topics which are of paramount importance, but still not receiving enough attention and support. First of all, the long-awaited prophylactic vaccines against cutaneous leishmaniasis. Many studies testing different vaccines have been conducted. We are now testing candidates for the so-called third generations vaccines, but still it's not clear if any of these vaccines will complete the cycle and being registered. The issues of mental problems associated with the skin NTDs and its inclusion in the daily calculation has recently been to the discussions. However, we do not know at this stage which is the best methodologies to assess this mental problem burden. And of course, we also don't know exactly how to manage this situation. Even when we are developing different treatments for cutaneous leishmaniasis, most clinical studies you need to keep in mind are conducted in adult population. So additional studies, which implies additional time, are needed to determine the safety and efficacy of any of these new treatments in children, pregnant women, patients with other comorbidities. Similarly, there is not much information about how to treat all the outbreaks that are being reported on a regular basis. The issue of access was discussed today in the morning in one of the presentations, and we constantly hear of shortage of anti-leishmania drugs, the use of counterfeit medicines, and other issues hampering the proper and opportune treatment of patients with cutaneous leishmaniasis. Finally, we believe that more R&D on vector and reservoirs are needed to better characterize the life cycle of the parasites and hopefully to develop better preventing and prophylactic treatment interventions. So, with respect to treatment, we strongly believe that a promising and brighter future will come in the following years when the current drugs, which are toxic and requires many weeks of treatment, can be replaced by a safer and more efficacious new drugs. Thank you very much. We would like to mention the support from our different partners, including, of course, the UK, Swiss, and German governments, GHIT, and another supporters among other groups worldwide. Thank you very much.